started today, Surah Al-Imran, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abi Umama al-Bahili narrates that he says, I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that read the Quran, and especially referring to these two surahs, and he refers to them as two flowers. And he says that as a result of a person reading these surahs consistently, on the Day of Judgment, they will come كَأَنَّهُمَا غَمَامَتان أو كَأَنَّهُمَا غَيَايَتان, that they will come as shade, as two clouds of shade that will come and give comfort to this person on the Day of Judgment. So, Rasulullah ﷺ, regarding this surah, he has mentioned in other places too. Like the famous verses we know, in the third juz, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum, and the last verse of the surah, آمَنَ الرَّسُولُ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رَبِّهِ, all the way to the end. A person who recites this, at the end of every night before he goes to sleep, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects him until the morning. Regarding the surah, obviously we know Baqarah means a cow. Why is it named a cow? Because of the famous story of the Bani Israel that comes in the surah. And over here we mentioned that this surah, most portions of it are directed towards the Bani Israel, the Yahud, and their qualities, and the reasons for them being cursed, and the reasons of them being the way they are. And after mentioning all this, as you probably heard throughout the Taraweeh, Ya Bani Israel, Ya Bani Israel, Ya Bani Israel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rebukes them, He tells them, He tries to give them heed, He tries to tell them, come back. In the end, as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way is saying that, look at your past, look at your history, learn from it, and accept Islam, and inshallah, you will be saved from the eternal curse of damnation. And then this surah consists of three things, referring to three people. Number one, the Muslims. Number two, the kuffar. And number three, the munafiqs, the hypocrites. These three people are directed, are talked towards. And the first portion of the surah, the first half, which we read yesterday, consists of tawheed and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is that? Because the surah is what? It is a Makki surah. Meaning, the surah was revealed most of in Makkah. And if you look throughout the whole Quran, those surahs which are Makki will most of the time consist of mainly of Tawheed and Iman. Because Rasulullah ﷺ, for the beginning of his first 10 years in Makkah, all he did was build the Iman of the Sahaba. He built them up. He made them strong in believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because once a person's Iman is strong, when a person's faith is strong in Rasulullah ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it will be easier for him to understand the ahkam. It will be easier for him to practice upon the religion. So that is why in Makkah most of his whole time was spent on Iman. That is why the Makki surahs, they focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His greatness and His tawheed and Rasulullah's prophethood and His risalah. That is what the Surah Baqarah consists of. And subhanallah, the surah starts. I'll just pick a few portions from throughout the surah and we'll talk about them and we'll end inshallah. The first word, Alif Lam Mim. Mufassirin write that no one knows the meaning. Why? As a sign of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that we're starting this Quran with something that you do not know. In other words, that in the Quran there will be many things that you won't understand. But Iman demands that we accept without understanding. That we try our best to understand. But once it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, we accept it. Because Iman starts from where logic ends. Where the person's aql and logic ends, that's where the Iman starts from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again going back to why this was called Baqarah, the famous story that Bani Israel, they were told to slaughter a cow. And because of their khaslat and their characteristics, they kept asking questions after questions after questions. And because of their questioning, thinking that they would get out of the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what happened was, it was made hard upon them because of their constantly asking questions. After that, we move on and we see, for example, the portion that we read from today, the famous ayah that we hear over and over, we've been listening, coming up to Ramadan, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that why did He make Siyam fall upon us? And we had mentioned last week that the main objective of Siyam is taqwa. You know, we talk about the health benefits and the benefits, those are there, we understand those. But the main objective that a Muslim should get from fasting is taqwa. That this is what I need to inculcate, this is what I need to get out of Ramadan. Because in Ramadan we're fasting and we're staying away from that which is halal. Eating is halal, drinking is halal, marital relations are halal. But in Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts an extra condition. So that when a person leaves Ramadan, When a person exits Ramadan, now he has the strength. You know, like we go to the gym and we lift weight that is hard for us. Eventually it becomes easy. The same way a person is trained throughout Ramadan. That if I can protect myself because of this iman only, imagine what stops a person from eating and drinking? It's the foods in front of you. Nothing stops a person except for the iman in his heart. So the same way he has trained himself to protect himself from that which is halal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will give that person the tawfiq. If he fulfills the right of Ramadan, outside of Ramadan, to stay away from that which is haram, inshallah. And then the surah moves on, and it talks about various things, such as fighting in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, marital relations. What is the way to come back together after a dispute? What is the way of living life? From this, we don't have time to go into every single aspect, but we can take from this is what? That Islam and our deen is not only in the masjid. Our Islam and our deen is not only for Jum'ah. Our Islam and our deen is not only for Eid. Rather, Islam and deen is from the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I go to sleep. And from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Islam has to be a part, it's a way of my life. It's the way I live my life from the day I was born to the day I died. And then towards the end of the surah, beautifully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the ahkam and the encouragement of dealing with each other. You know, many a times we think that Islam and deen is only salah and believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's definitely there. That is your iman, that is your faith, which Surah Baqarah talks about over and over. That the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and believing in the angels and the last day of judgment. This is all part of Islam. Definitely we have to believe in it. But the second portion is mu'amalat. The way a person is with one another. One Ashraf rahimahullah, throughout his whole life he died saying this. That we think that Islam is to this. We don't even consider dealing with one another as Islam. That the way I deal my transaction, whether it's business, whether it's my family, whether it's how I greet people, whether it's how I sit with them, whether it's my akhlaq with them, the way I deal my dealings, my social dealings, this is a part of Islam too. And the biggest ayah in the Quran, just ironically, the biggest surah of the Quran, Surah Baqarah, has the biggest ayah of the Quran. Ayatul Dayn, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu idha tadayantum bidaynin ila ajalin musamman faktubuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that when you make relations, when you make an agreement with one another, then write it down. It's highly encouraged to write it down. This shows us what? That, there's a saying in Arabic beautifully, our teachers should tell us all the time, that عاشروا كالإخوان تعاملوا كالأجانب. That live like brothers. Live like brothers, like you love each other. But when you deal with one another, deal like strangers. Your own brother, your own sister, if there's a dealing, there's something money, there's something involved, whether it's business, whether it's a house, make it very clear. Write it down. To the extent, I remember Mufti Rahman Sahib, may Allah increase his life, one time, 2 years ago, he needed some help. So his close friend, he went to him. He told us this in class. He sat down with him and he needed a very small amount of money. It was in a loan, he needed something to pay a bill or something. So he asked his friend, he said, can you give me some money? He said, yes, it was 300, or I forgot the exact amount, but it was very less. So he took out a piece of paper and he said, write it down. So he's looking at him like, Hazrat, what are you talking about? Like, this is $300, like, it's okay even if you don't give it to me. He said, no, write it down. And this is the way he does everything. And this is the way he taught us. That when you deal with one another, he said, you should say, write it down on your ceiling. And when you wake up, that's the first thing you see. Make it a part of your life. That my mu'amalat and my relations with one another has to be crystal clear. So I make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us and He gives us a deep understanding of the Quran. And after that, He allows us to act upon it. وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير.